After 15 years of what everyone believed was a flawless marriage, Sarah and Mark found themselves sitting in total silence in a car outside a divorce lawyer's office. There was no infidelity. There were no financial secrets or hidden betrayals. They had not fallen out of love. Yet, their marriage was completely over, ending for one terrifyingly simple reason: they could never agree on who was right. In psychology, this is known as the righteousness trap. It is a slow, silent poison that destroys thousands of relationships every year. It doesn't start with shouting, it starts with the human ego. For 15 years, Sarah and Mark did not realize that every time one of them won an argument, the relationship lost. They turned their home from a sanctuary into a courtroom, where every conversation became a trial, and both of them acted as the prosecutor, the judge, and the victim. It always began with the smallest things. A misplaced set of keys, a forgotten chore, or a minor disagreement about their children's schedule. But to the human brain, being wrong feels like a threat to survival. So, instead of listening to each other, they built legal cases. Mark would bring up mistakes Sarah made 5 years ago to prove his point. Sarah would analyze Mark's tone of voice to prove he was being disrespectful. They were both brilliant at defending themselves, but they completely forgot how to protect each other. They became so obsessed with winning the war of words that they didn't notice their connection was bleeding out. The danger of the righteousness trap is that it feels justified. When you believe you have the moral high ground, your brain rewards you with a dopamine hit. You feel powerful. Mark truly believed he was just trying to maintain logic and order in the house. Sarah was convinced she was standing up for her emotional boundaries. But underneath this intense need to be correct, there is always a deeper, hidden emotion. Psychologists point out that the obsession with being right is rarely about the facts. It is almost always a defense mechanism against a deep-seated fear of vulnerability. To admit you are wrong feels like admitting you are flawed, weak, or unworthy of love. For Mark, saying, "I made a mistake," felt like losing control. For Sarah, backing down felt like letting her identity be erased. So, they kept fighting. Months turned into years, and the nature of their communication shifted. The loud, passionate argument stopped, replaced by something much worse, a cold, heavy, suffocating silence. This is the stage where resentment solidifies into a wall. They lived in the same house, shared the same bed, and raised the same children, but they were miles apart. They became roommates who shared a history but no longer shared a soul. Every evening was an exercise in emotional survival, a quiet war where the weapons were short answers, heavy sighs, and turned backs. One rainy Tuesday evening, the breaking point finally arrived. It wasn't caused by a massive explosion of anger. In fact, it was the quietest night of their marriage. Mark had come home late from work, and Sarah had already put the kids to bed. A minor question about dinner turned into another cold exchange of facts. Mark looked at Sarah, saw the familiar look of judgment in her eyes, and felt an overwhelming wave of exhaustion. He didn't argue. He didn't try to prove his innocence. Instead, he quietly walked upstairs, pulled his old suitcase from the closet, and began packing his clothes. He wasn't leaving to hurt her. He was leaving because he could no longer bear the weight of defending his own soul in his own home. He was tired of being a defendant in a trial that never ended. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching him fold his shirts. For 15 years, her immediate instinct in a moment like this would have been to list all the reasons why he was wrong for leaving, why he was being unfair, and why she was the real victim. Her ego was screaming at her to fight back, to win the final argument. But as she looked at the empty spaces in his closet, something shifted deep inside her. For the first time in over a decade, the terrifying reality of losing her partner became bigger than her need to protect her pride. As Mark zipped his suitcase and reached for the bedroom door, Sarah realized she had to make a choice. It is a choice that every person in a relationship must face eventually. You can be right, or you can be in a relationship, but you can rarely be both. To save her marriage, she had to do something that felt completely unnatural to her ego. She had to surrender her weapon of correctness. She stepped into his path, looked into his tired eyes, and said words he had not heard in 15 years. She didn't say, "You're being unfair." She didn't say, "Look what you're doing to our family." Instead, she looked down and whispered, "I am so sorry. I have been fighting to win, instead of fighting for us. And I don't want to win anymore if it means losing you." Mark stopped. The silence in the room changed from cold hostility to heavy, raw vulnerability. Admitting fault is not an act of weakness, it is the ultimate act of emotional intelligence. It creates a safe space where the other person no longer needs to defend themselves. When Sarah dropped her guard, Mark's defenses crumbled too. He dropped his suitcase. That night, they didn't sleep. For the first time in 15 years, they spoke not to establish the truth, but to understand each other's pain. They realized that peace is always better than victory. Sarah and Mark managed to save their relationship because they learned how to dismantle the righteousness trap before it was too late. They learned to replace the question, "Who is right?" with, "What is the distance this argument is creating between us?" It took them months of therapy to unlearn 15 years of courtroom behavior, but they built a completely new connection based on emotional maturity. However, the story of Sarah and Mark has a hidden, darker side that most couples never talk about. While they found their way back to each other, the emotional scar left by 15 years of constant silent warfare had changed something fundamental in Mark's perception of trust. 3 months after the night he unpacked his bags, Sarah accidentally opened an old laptop Mark had left on the kitchen table. What she found hidden in an encrypted folder changed everything she thought she knew about their recovery, and made her realize that some traps, once sprung, leave damage that no amount of psychological wisdom can easily repair. Is your own need to be right creating a wall between you and the person you love? Think about it carefully. Because in our next video, we will reveal exactly what Sarah discovered in that folder, and the hidden psychological consequence of long-term resentment that almost no one sees coming. Subscribe to Hearts and Minds Lab so you don't miss part 2. Thank you for listening.